Hello, my name is Troy Adu here.
I'm Tyler Hoskins.
And you're listening to our Sick Ass podcast. Kia ora and welcome to another guest episode of the Sick Ass podcast. Today's guest is actually someone who we have a lot more similarities than I ever thought, and we actually know a lot more people from different walks of life that have come together. And I think that's the coolest thing about this podcast is we talk about different perspectives, but then we also talk about what people know, and that you can see where things converge and then you can see where things differ. But that's what makes relationships, I guess, a little bit more rich. So today's guest is a fellow Cook Islander as well, but multiple other things, Molly Peters. And so before I knew you, I knew the Peters family in the Cook Islands.
Ah, do you?
Right, so, I don't want to talk about, I'll talk about her on another podcast when I actually get her on, but obviously the Olympian slash cop now, and she was one of the best in her classes. But yeah, that's, so that was the first thing. And then the second one is now, I've met you through other people and we've kind of seen each other around the place, but now we get to have a sit down and get to know a little bit about you. So thank you for coming on last minute.
That's okay. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so like I said there, perspectives, upbringing, all of that sort of stuff kind of makes us who we are. And we were having a discussion before this about how everything, like at different times of your life, things just don't seem like they are relevant at that moment. And then there seems to be something along the path that makes you start to see like, oh, actually that kind of it's playing its role now. So with your upbringing, you come from like the far north, so probably as far north that most people will go at some point in their life, maybe.
Yeah.
If you want to give us a little bit of an idea on what that was like as a young girl growing up.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Northland, which is between Auckland and Kaitaia, so not as far as Kaitaia, which is sort of like top of the North Island, and then obviously above Auckland, in a very small rural town in the Bay of Islands. And I went to a small rural primary school, and I went to a small rural high school, and I remember when I came to Otago, it was of course very different and very big city-ish, and met a lot of new people as well. Up north particularly, there's like a very high Māori population as well, so that was especially through our high schooling, like that was probably that culture was a very strong influence on what I guess on my upbringing, as well as my dad grew up in the Cook Islands, and my mum is New Zealand European. Oh, awesome.
And you, so pretty much everything you described in terms of your upbringing, you small in front of that. Is that in terms of the population of the people who were like kind of occupying those spaces?
Yeah. So I guess like in any like small rural town, everyone knows everyone, and like, to put in perspective, my high school, when I left, our roll was 420 students.
Right.
And so I remember talking to people who went to like colleges in Auckland, like Rangitoto, like Auckland Girls Grammar, and I could probably have named most of the people at my school, and they're like, I don't even know everyone in my year group, you know. So it was like it was really nice though in that way. It's a good community.
Absolutely. And most of those people that you would like go to high school with, you'd then do other like club stuff with, and pretty much you would be like just transferring. It's almost like that scene on Boy where the auntie is like the shopkeeper but it's like, it's not like that small, but the point is that most people who, you do everything together, and then there is that really strong sense of community. Everyone knows each other, but then you also have really good support networks. Did you find that growing up, or was it a little bit, was it not like that at all?
No, I think it definitely was. And obviously, like, you'll get that in any city of New Zealand anyway, but I definitely felt that there was like a lot of support, but it's kind of like anything, until I left, I didn't really, you don't think about it until you leave, until you like change your perspective and you see other things, and then you really reflect on it and you're like, oh wow, maybe that was quite a unique upbringing, you know, or like there's definitely things that I was exposed to that like I wasn't the case for everybody growing up in New Zealand. Even going to a really high Māori population school.
I think that is quite interesting, and it's like the whole perspective thing we always talk about is that we're so close to everything that we do, and that's the only world we've known until we move out of it. And some people never really move out of it, and that's all they've known, and they're just like, this is, day in, day out, this is me, but they don't actually understand the, I guess, significance of it, like we were talking about in the intro, until you actually get that step away. So you went from like the north, as we were talking about before, and then was your first move out of there to Dunedin?
Yes. Yeah.
And so, like, firstly, why Dunedin of all places? Like, that's as far as you could get.
Yeah.
And if you were going to stay in the country, that's as far away as you could have gone.
Yeah.
Was that a strategic choice? Was it to do with, getting away from family or just experiencing something new, or was it just because of the course?
It was definitely a mix of all those things. I remember through high school, like you sort of, everyone asks, oh, what are you going to do when you leave and everything like that. And I was kind of like, oh, I always liked food, always loved food. And I feel like definitely Pacific culture played a big part in that. Food was such a massive part of my upbringing. And I liked cooking food, but I also liked health and fitness. And I remember slowly just sort of weaning through all the potential career paths. I remember thinking about physio, and teaching and all sorts. But I remember it towards the end of year 13 being like, oh, I want to do nutrition, and I know that you can go into dietetics sort of thing, and you can only do dietetics in Otago or Auckland, which are the two options for me. And I remember being like, and I think it's kind of like a mix of when you're that age, I would have been 16, 17, and like you kind of, you get sick of your parents a little bit, and you sort of tend to argue a bit more, and of course you're like keen to get out there and see the world, see Otago. And so it was definitely, that was a strong driver, was to being like, I want to leave Northland. Auckland was a little bit too close to home, I think, and I had a lot of family in Auckland, and I'd sort of spent a lot of time there, but being able to having my parents not having the option to just pop down for the weekend, it was kind of, it was all part of that, again, being 16, 17 and wanting to be real independent and wanting to do my own thing, which I think is important. And so came down here for dietetics and or for nutrition, with like having dietetics in mind.
Yeah. So you're one of the first people that have come on here and kind of said that you had like an option of postgrad, like prior to actually getting on to your. So most people will just like go through their undergrad and then they happen to stumble into postgrad. But so if you always had your eyes set on it, was there ever a moment during your studies where you're just like, oh, maybe postgrad isn't for me?
Definitely, 100%. I remember when I first came to Otago, it was such a shock. Like, it was in a good way, like, like meeting a whole lot of new people from different cultures, kids that grew up in cities, because again, we were just, sort of just exposed to sort of the people that you grow up with. And coming down here and like academically, I felt like I was so behind. And I think from high school, I went to quite a low decile high school, and that's not to say that it reflected in the learning, but I would sort of explain it like maybe the school had different priorities, like it wasn't academics maybe wasn't the strong point in that sense. And so when I came here, and of course then I'm working alongside other students that academically maybe did better at school, and I remember just being so overwhelmed, and I like felt really like I'd never had to manage my own like time and my own taking time out of my day to sit down and study, it was very foreign to me, and I really struggled through that first year. I remember after that first year I was so convinced I wasn't going to come back to uni. I was I really didn't enjoy. I just felt like I was like, this is not for me, like I'm not, I can't finish this sort of thing, and it was just too hard, and it didn't feel like, and when you're in that first year environment too, and even though nutrition isn't first year health sci, it is minus physics essentially.
Yes, yeah.
And so you just being like a dot in a mass of there wasn't that one-on-one learning that I guess I had in high school too, which was all part of that sort of like driving yourself. And so at the end of first year, I remember being like, this is not for me. Had failed a few papers. And thinking that I did quite well at high school too, and then coming down to here and being like, oh shit, maybe I'm not, maybe this isn't for me, sort of thing. But I remember, which sounds crazy now, but the reason I came back was because I really enjoyed the people I met.
Right.
and we'd sort of organised a flat and everything, and it did get a little bit better, and I think I passed all my second semester papers, and I was like, okay, hold on, no, I got this, like we can keep going, sort of thing. And so then obviously kept going. And
that's cool. That social thing is so important. Like I think another thing we've done an episode on it was just talking about like our experiences of coming down to university, and we just found like the hardest part of university wasn't the actual learning that you had to do at like in uni. It was just like, well, okay, I've never lived by myself before, I've never cooked, I've never had to pay rent, you had to do so many adult things at one moment, as well as trying to like learn on top of that. And then at the same time, like we were lucky, we reflected on it a lot, and we were saying that we had a really good flat and we all supported each other, but then we'd like known friends who had horrible flats, hated being at their house, and then they just hated everything else, and then their grades started to fall.
Yeah.
Did you find that in your first year? Like, I know this is a really deep question off the bat, but like, were you happy with where you were like overall, or was it kind of like, was it just so overwhelming and that's probably why you kind of fell behind?
No, I think I fell behind because I was like academically maybe just a little bit behind.
Sure.
But also because I had a tendency to, which I still sort of do now in a small way, but I prioritize like socializing or doing exercise or I don't know, that sort of thing over study quite often, because I'm always, and I think it's obviously it's good to an extent, but you got to get things done, right? Yeah. And I think that's probably more what played into it, because I really did enjoy the whole environment and like being around heaps of people. And
so like figuring out that balance between all of those.
Oh yeah.
So then coming back, so you ended up finishing 3.5 years? 3.5 years,
yeah.
So you got that, you had a little bit of time off. Did you, like, if you hadn't had that time off, do you think you would have had the same, I guess, strength or endurance to be able to go the rest of your postgrad?
I don't know. That's a really good question. And because I remember thinking, like, all through undergrad, you kind of, like, teeter on, like, oh, I'll apply for dietetics and I'll see what happens. Or, like, oh, I could go into working. Oh, but there's no jobs in nutrition. Like, I don't know. There's, like, a lot sort of going through your head. And I remember, like, finishing that half year. And it probably worked out quite well, because then I had, like, all this time to apply for dietetics and really put like a lot of my energy into the application and everything, and being like, oh, I'll see what happens. But just like my whole uni career was such a good growing experience for me and for my confidence and for everything, and having to like make all these applications and having to like really think about like why I wanted to apply for dietetics and everything like that. But I think that time off was helpful in that I had like space to really think about it, and then consider other avenues and consider doing other things too. And a
few things you touched on just in that with like learnings from uni, and you just said it was one of the biggest learning curves you have to. I mean, the first thing is you've been put out of your regular environment that you've lived in for what 17, 18 years, and then you've gone like 3.5 years of like an exponential growth, and because you've like just been removed from what it is you're used to. Yeah. What were the things that you found going back home? So like maybe, usually when you come down to uni, maybe a break, you'll go home and you'll see, and you start to notice things are like, wow, that's actually so much different than I ever thought it was. Yeah. Was there anything that stood out to you when you would go back home?
I think just in general, maybe the very like, but then the very like relaxed environment of Northland, because it's such like I feel like every time I go home it's so peaceful, and people maybe like move a little bit slower, and that might just be my experiences with when I go home. Like obviously people are doing things at home, but I think that's good. It was good for me to acknowledge in terms of just like slowing down and remembering that even though I'm down here doing all this academic stuff, like it's not everything, you know? Yeah. And I think that's what I love about going home. Every time I go home, it's such a nice reminder that this is not everything, you know, and people can not go to uni, and people can, like live simpler lives and be really happy. And I really like that about Northland. But I think in general, maybe just coming down and like doing all this sort of doing all the study and going back, and like especially from like my dad's perspective, being like constantly reminded that it isn't everything, which sort of plays into what I literally just said, but that's kind of having to like rein in that, oh, they don't care. Maybe like my family don't want to hear about the latest study in nutrition, or you know what I mean? Like it's not. Yeah, I think that's really good, and it's been really important in terms of balancing, like, you know, I don't know, sort of being real with obviously like progressing in the nutrition field.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before, where I've just like, it's almost like a fake land down here. Like everything is set up for university, right? So your whole life is university, and it's kind of become, we are now like in the Truman Show of Dunedin, and this is what we think that this is all people care about. And then when you finally get that chance to leave, like you're just, you know, you're Molly. When you go up there, you're just the same old Molly.
Still Molly,
and you just go back there, you fit in, and you do your thing.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a huge reminder for a lot of people where, you know, they're not studying well, or things aren't going so well and they're flat or something, and it's just like that's one little part of everything that's going on. And if you could just take a step back and just like breathe for a little bit. This is stuff I still have to tell myself, and that's why I'm good at putting it out there, because I look in the mirror, I'm like, Troy, nah. But you know, those things are just things that will always be able to ground us, and I'm glad you've got a place like that.
100%. And I also think it's such a useful thing to have as a health professional too, when you work with people, you know, or in any job, when you're working with people, to remember, you know, that you're like what you've learned, or like the courses that you've done isn't, I don't know, and it can be so easy to forget when you surround yourself with, like, especially in this uni environment, you know, you surround yourself with all these other academics and like people that obviously, like, you know, expertise is in their field, and then to be reminded that, oh, hold on, like I have like done quite a lot of learning, but to get the message across to like community or to other people, you need to, you know, you need to be a bit more real. You need to sort of like tone it back.
Yep. I think that's what people forget all the time, especially in academia, is that when we publish papers and we do all of those sorts of things, we're only talking to other academics. But we keep saying that we're here to benefit the community. I was like, the community don't read these. What are you talking about? Like, you're not out there actually doing things. So that kind of brings us into some of your clinical practice. So you went in and you applied for dietetics, which, as actually was said in the John O'Kumar thing, this is a competitive entry course. It's not one of those things that anyone can just apply for and get. So it's a Masters of Dietetics, and you're currently in your second year. So your last couple of months, really?
Yes,
or weeks, maybe.
I'll be done in 6 or 7 weeks.
Right, cool.
Will be the end of it.
And so you applied, you were pretty sure that this is what you wanted to do. You wanted to dedicate those 2 years to it, even after that time out?
Even after that time out, I think it was good to have that sort of direction as well. Yeah. And once I found out, I got in and everything.
Was there a plan of, when I finish dietetics, and it might be a plan right now, what you're hoping to do after? So like, say you weren't given a scholarship, but this is like your pure grind to go through.
I don't think so. I think something that I learnt through uni as well is that everything can change so quickly, and like you never, even if like, I mean, not even just through uni, through like life in general, I guess, but you can never really, I think it's important to have goals, obviously, like understandably, and set like sort of vague milestones and things that you want to do, but I've always kept it relatively open too, and been like, I think even through my placements now, I've been like, I've really enjoyed this area, or I've really enjoyed this area, but like, I think everything will happen for a reason, and I think it'll all just sort of work out I'll end up going into something that I will hopefully enjoy. Having said that, I do have a particular want to focus on Pacific and Māori community health.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And what have you found? So I know through a lot of our learnings, especially because I'm doing a lot of teaching into like Pacific health and like public health and all that sort of stuff, and what people are exposed to in terms of like Pacific and Māori health is very low. And it's kind of one of those things that people need to kind of innately know before they go into the workforce, because what they're taught at a university isn't really enough. Have you had that chance to work with Pacific communities yet, or Pacific and Māori communities yet?
Not really, no, not like specifically in the nutrition sector.
But when you were going through, did you find that there was a huge gap in a lot of the learning?
Definitely, and it's kind of similar to like what we were saying before about thinking that you know, like expecting that everybody else is sort of on your level. Like you can sort of expect, especially when like growing up in like a high Māori Pacific community, and you sort of expect, everybody else maybe had that exposure as well. When you come down, you realize, no, they didn't. Absolutely. You know, it was kind of similar in that, I didn't realize how, you know, not everybody was taught about the treaty in primary school and high school. You know, not everyone had that sort of strong like Māori influence in their schooling. I remember being quite surprised at that. And the exposure that we did get, I don't know if it really did it justice.
Sure.
I don't think it's enough.
Yeah, it was one of those things where we acknowledged that was a thing.
Yeah.
The reason why we take that day off is because there was a treaty that was signed. Blah, blah, blah. And it has its importance, but its relevance and how does it work into the workforce isn't really like carried out enough.
Yeah, and I think even just like understanding the inequalities of those ethnic groups, really understanding a lot of people.
Do you find that that's helped with your drive for getting through as well? Like, has it added to a sense of purpose?
Definitely. And I know there's so many times during during the Masters as well. So, you think about dropping out, and you think I think it's normal to go through those motions. A lot of the reason why I kept at it was because I don't know, something you just sit back and you're like, no, what I am doing is really important. And like when I look at other Pacific people in dietetics, and there's not many from what I can see as well, that has definitely influenced me to keep going.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I think that comes into like another thing that I like to talk about on this podcast is people just kind of getting to know themselves a little bit more. It's one of those things that at first you feel like there's pressure on you to be that person, and then out of nowhere, like sometimes you find that purpose, then there's this switch in your head that happens, and you're just like, no, that's why I'm here. Like, it's not people putting pressure on me. This is like part of my legacy, and this is part of what I was put here to do. Did you have that switch, or have you kind of always had that drive in that direction?
No, I feel like there's definitely a switch, and even with my ethnicity, because I'm like biracial, I'm half, and there was definitely that whole, do I deserve this specific scholarship, or should I be applying for it, or is it warranted for me to like own that Pacific ethnicity when I didn't grow up in the islands? I grew up here, and that was I guess like a key part of me then, like that whole realization of being like, no, I do deserve to be here, and like what I can do with it is like it's up to me, and I can make it sort of useful, like I can use it to benefit. I don't yeah.
No, there's a spiritual element to it, a lot of it. Like, I know this sounds wishy-washy, and this is why the funding doesn't go as easily, but there's something about sitting down with someone who reflects you a lot better than someone else that makes you more willing to open up and all that. We've talked about like clinical practice where some people, like the issue is somewhere in there, and there are people who will like point at the issue and point at you being the reason that you have the issue, and then there's other people who will understand that like it's an entire environment that is creating that. And it's almost like a spiritual thing. I feel like it's a human thing, and you can't really learn it. And I feel like you might innately have it.
You reckon?
Maybe.
And I think this year as well, through the clinical placement, I remember being like, I had because we got so much, the exposure in your second year of dietetics is so much greater, at least for Otago, than it is in your first year. And I remember I had it was a Pacific patient, and I walked in and he was so happy to see me, and I hadn't even said anything yet, like it wasn't even, and he was like, oh, kia ora, and I sat down with him, and he was so happy to talk to me, and he said straight away, he was like, oh, it's so nice to have like a Pacific, like student come and see me. He goes, and then he started talking about, and it's not that's, like, I'm not saying that there's, not being a Pacific dietitian doesn't make you, at all a good dietitian. It's more that to see how receptive he was, even just to the fact that I was, Pacific, it was a good reminder that this is it could be like a step in the right direction.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we already know that the barriers to access of healthcare is already quite a bit lower. If he like probably just so nervous in that moment to be there, like who am I going to see? They're probably just going to judge me again, and then like smiling before you even said anything. Like, that's just kind of cements you right there. Like, okay, that's why I'm here. That's an awesome feeling. But
it was a good reminder.
Something you spoke about there was that you go through this internal battle of, do I deserve these different things? And I know it sounds like you've overcome it, but it's always going to be a thing that comes and goes. What are the things that you tell yourself, or when you do go through this, what are the things that go through you? So like from the negative through to the positive, through to the plateaus and feelings. Like, what are the actual thoughts that go on when that comes to the forefront of your mind?
Oh God, so many. And you're right, it's been such a journey, but I think a lot of it was, I remember when I would apply for Pacific scholarships or anything sort of in that area, I'd have to write remember getting a question once, and I was like, what does your ethnicity mean to you? I remember absolutely stressing over it for so long, being like, I don't know what to put, but having to write it down and having to go through all these other applications where you do express your ethnicity. It was such a good way for me to like, put it in perspective for myself, and to be like acknowledging I'm not full, and no, I didn't grow up in the islands, but I still have had that like cultural influence from my dad and from his family sort of thing, And I know that, so they're like putting it down was probably one thing, and then surrounding myself like with my Pacific family and being like, no, this is, when you sort of reflect on things you do now and like why you do them, and I don't know if that's like a thing that happens in the early 20s, but you like, you tend to like make connections between like your upbringing and the person you are today.
Oh yeah.
And there were definitely a lot of times where I've been like, oh, I do that because of like that influence that I had growing up, sort of thing. And it's sort of been like a combination, I guess, of all those sort of things being that have helped me be like, no, I do deserve this, and like I can, I can go forward with in that area. And it's like it's all the very like it's still going, we're still going. And it was even a matter of like this year I bullied my cousin into doing Cook Island language lessons with me. And it was something that I was like, I just need to do, because my dad never taught us growing up. He thought that English was, which,
I think at the time was everyone thought the only way to go forward was to be really good and proficient in English.
Yeah, definitely. And like and I understand why he did that. And even though I was like, God, it would be really handy to have been like bilingual. But like, I appreciate that he did that. But I could for so many years, I was like, oh, but it would have been so handy to. And I'm like, I need to, like, if I want to do it, I just need to start now, That was a matter of what I did, and I started, and it was so helpful, and I want to keep going and stuff. So, just like making those little things along the way, it all builds the confidence, and it all like helps sort of reiterate why you're doing what you're doing.
I'm just with that. So you're a Cook Islander, and you go into a Cook Islands Māori class, and maybe not everyone in there is also Cook Islands Māori. Did you find that was a big barrier, like for you not going in? Because I know for a lot of Māori students, they don't, like, if they can't speak Māori, they find it really hard to go to Māori classes because they're expected to know more than like the Pākehā kid who's sitting next to them. And then they feel like there's this embarrassment. Was that hard for you, or you pretty like, you just strolled on in and you thought it was a cool idea?
No, it was definitely a level of like nervousness, being like, what will everybody else be? Like, how much do they identify with the culture? But then something I've also learned is that culture is such a spectrum. You know what I mean? Like, the biggest. And you could be, you two people that identify as Māori but sit on very different, and that was something that I learned in the class as well, is that even though not everybody there was Cook Island Māori, but everyone had in some way had a very different influence from their Cook Island culture sort of thing. And it was good, and like obviously over the 10 weeks everyone got a lot more comfortable with each other, and it was all that made it sort of like a bit more, like you'd be keen to do it every Tuesday because you got comfortable with each other and stuff like that. But I don't think I think just like keeping at it was an important part of like continuing, I could, because I was quite intimidated at that first thing, and I was like, oh no, like what do I know? But then you realise that everybody else was also on that journey, so it was quite
I think that's the thing. If everyone right now switched to this whole like mentality that we are all here to learn and we're not actually in races with other people, everyone's just fine. Like you're not comparing where you are to other people, and like you're just more likely to be happy making a dick of yourself. Like if you get it wrong, that's fine. At least you now know it's wrong and you can correct it for next time. And just with that, so I think the thing with Māori, or the thing with any language, is that you need to try to immerse yourself in it somewhere and just like practice a little bit. Did you try it with, so you said your dad's like a Māori speaker? Have you tried any on him? Yes.
And like it was really interesting because I remember him being like, he would always be, sometimes I'd be like, how come you didn't like teach us Cook Island Māori and stuff? And he'd be like, don't worry about it. He's like, you're good at English, like that's all you need, why do you need to speak Cook Island Māori for? Then of course as more as I went into like Pacific healthcare, I was like, God, it would be a really handy skill to have. And then when I went home, because I went home over lockdown, and I was doing the class, and he was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I got to do my Kukara Māori class." And it took me a lot to tell him as well, because I thought he'd be really like hesitant and really, but no, he was in. He wanted to join, and like then he's all of a sudden he started like he would talk to me in Kukara Māori, and he'd be like, I'd tell him something like where I'm going, and he'd be like, no, like this is like you tell me in Kukara Māori, you know, like so he got really into it, and it was a really good learning point for me to be like, oh, maybe you know, like it was like I just needed to make that sort of move, and he was obviously very receptive to it anyway. So that was quite cool. And now he'll like text me in Kukara Māori. I'm like, well, calm down. Like I'm not fluent. I'm still learning. But it was good.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's just that willing to give things a go.
Definitely.
Like so we've been teaching a lot of the Pacific Health stuff into some of the different courses, like your physios, dent, like all of the health professionals. Yeah. And we go to them and we basically just say like, you're not going to be an expert in any of this by the time you leave, but the best thing you can do is just like understand that this is a gap in your knowledge. And when you're with these people, just try your best to include them. Definitely. And just like, don't expect that they are going to respond like every single other person. Yeah. But then I was like, that's not only for Pacific people though. That's not only for Māori people. This is for every human being. You can't just like sit down. So in education, I think it's like if it works for Māori, it works for everyone. Yeah, yeah. And like I don't want to be biased, but I agree with that. You reckon? To an extent that like if it's working for these people, which is just very holistic, pretty much like that's it's very broad in how we should be approaching people. I think that might be the way to go, like not siloing people. Yeah. No, I could get behind that. Definitely the holistic approach, very strong in the cultures. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you think that because you have been coming in, so say, I think before this we were talking about your class, you said there was one Māori and one Pacific / Cook Island, so yourself. Yeah. Did they expect anything of you? Like as that person, or like what you were meant to do or what your role was? Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think I ever, obviously like they just went through the whole offering me Pacific support, and if I felt there were also like when there were Pacific opportunities, they would like contact me and ask me about that sort of thing. So I guess there was that, but I don't think that was them expecting. That was just them being supportive. I don't think they expected anything, but I definitely took it upon myself to like, even when we do like shared lunch and I'd do the karakia or something. And I know that's not Pacific, that's Māori, but again, that was sort of the environment that I grew up in. I don't know, and then once you like sort of started doing things like that, then but it was cool because when I'd do it, then other people, I remember another girl in the class, she was like, I want to learn it. She asked me if she could learn it, and then she did it. Like that was a good experience, going through that. Yeah. But I don't think that they expected anything of me in particular. I didn't feel like they did. Yeah. And now, so your focus is more looking at community or public health type thing, right? So you're looking at being able to take care of a whole bunch of people, and that's where you can kind of be with what you were doing. Was there ever, so like you said that you were into sport and all that sort of stuff and exercise, was there ever an idea of possibly going into like sport dietetics or sports nutrition or anything like that? Yes, like in terms of like it was an area that I was like, I could be interested in doing this, but it was also, I know that, I don't know, I feel like you get in the dietetics world, you get lost in the idea that there's not many opportunities in sports nutrition. And I mean, that might just be my perception at the moment. There might be a lot of opportunities, but I just don't know that. But I think I always thought like, like you could be the All Blacks dietitian or something, but there's really low turnover in those jobs because understandably, once you get into a job like that, you probably don't want to leave. Yeah. I think that's why I didn't go that way. And I think also, I was just thinking more like wanting to work more in, I don't know, I guess sports nutrition and general healthy eating. They can they cross over a lot anyway. Yeah. Rather than working with like people that have sort of already, they've excelled in whatever sport, or they're quite, they probably know a bit more about their sort of nutrition, rather, I was thinking more like, starting from scratch. And they have way higher access to resources as well. Yeah. So like they've got it there if they need it. Yeah. But you're like dealing with trying to, if we want to bridge those gaps of like inequities and inequalities, you can be that part of the workforce that actually helps to bring that up. Yeah. Is that your feeling? Yeah, kind of. Cool. Yeah, nice. Yeah. And then I just had another question. So with regards to the dietetic side of everything, so COVID has hit, and you said about like right at the very beginning, you're talking about not having such set plans because things can change. That was a clear example of things changing. What did that do to your course, and did it ever like get you to a point where like it derailed you, and then how did you stay on course to almost finishing at the end?
For me personally, COVID kind of worked in quite well with my like thing this year, in a way that of course there were inconveniences and things were cancelled and everything like that, but it was like when we had the big lockdown, I was writing my thesis.
Oh, awesome.
And so I went up north and I stayed with my mum and dad and just wrote essentially. I was just writing for most of the time, and it was good because it was like a really nice balance of like that very like holistic rural life, and then I could write when I needed to and everything like that. So that sort of kind of worked in my favour a little bit. But I guess in other since obviously clinical practice has changed quite a lot. We all wear masks in the hospital and everything like that because of COVID. Just like the sort of health and safety measures that are put in place. That's sort of something that's changed, and I guess just not having the meetings, like having everything over Zoom and everything like that as well has changed quite a bit. But overall, like I think, I don't know, we adapt so quick, and that's all that I've really found has happened. Everyone's just adjusted.
That's what we try to talk about all the time, is just like the faster you can adapt and just like not feel like a victim in any of it, the better you are in the outcome, because you're just like, oh, I'm not blaming anyone for this. Like,
exactly.
We're all going through this, and the faster we can get through it. Just on the Zoom stuff, did you find that energy-wise it's like so different and it was hard to give in Zoom meetings?
Yeah, a little bit. And I actually had a community learning session 2 weeks ago, and I actually had to go get a COVID test because I was meant to do it in person, because up in Auckland we were allowed to go in person at that point, but I had to go get a COVID test because I had been at in close contact, been in casual contact with somebody, and we were negative, don't worry, everyone, we were negative. But I couldn't do the session in person, I had to do it over Zoom, and it was with 9 to 10-year-old children, and it was meant to be an interactive session, which it still was, so I was like sitting there demonstrating, we were going through the digestive system, and it was all very fun, but I was actually just writing my reflection on this before I came, because I have to reflect on it, as you do in most in most of dietetics, but it was a really interesting learning experience, having to because I think when you communicate with those sort of younger age groups anyway, you've kind of, your energy's got to be a bit next level, you're sort of, and having to do that and then over Zoom and demonstrate on a camera and control all of them, that was a really good learning experience. And I took away a lot from it, and there was a lot of like yelling and a lot of like big expressive movements and a lot of give me a thumbs up But yeah, it was good. It was interesting, and maybe something that we're gonna have to do more often of. So
I think it's highlighted an area where people don't need to travel anymore, because like a lot of our things that we work across the country within a lot of things, and now we've just realised we don't need to fly people down anymore. Just do it over Zoom, which not a fan of, but like at the same time, if we can get it done, we can get it done. So I had 2 questions before our regular final question. So something that you said in there is that you went home, you basically did a writing retreat for your thesis. What was your actual thesis topic?
I did fluoride intakes in adolescent males in New Zealand. So in dietetics, or what we did in our year, is they sort of gave us a cohort, which was adolescent males, and then everyone got divvied up different nutrients, and you sort of prioritise. So I got fluoride. Was
there a specific location that you were, or was this like a nationwide thing?
Because we did it as a class, so everybody collected data in different areas, and we all collected like overall dietary data, and then we all picked from the data what we needed. So it was good because I got data from obviously like all over the country, because we were sort of all spread out, but I personally collected data in Auckland. Are you allowed to talk about anything that you found from that, or is it still like embargoed? I think, that's a really good question. The general consensus of what you kind of came across. It was very interesting. I think because before I had started writing, I really didn't think twice about fluoride in general, like you hear it in passing and people were sort of like, fluoride is doing all sorts of bad things to the world. But actually having to sit down, like go through the research, like form my own opinion on it was very interesting, especially having like talking to other people about what they thought about fluoride, and then sort of reflecting on what I had, like researched and read, and it was a really good journey of like forming my own opinion. It was very interesting, and I think overall, I think overall, like, fluoride exposure, like, not a lot of the population in New Zealand actually are exposed to fluoridated water anyway. So it's, I don't know, and a lot of, like, you know, a lot of, how do I say, like, what's the word when, like, when people have an opinion on something, but it's not that it's not warranted,
like
but it's maybe not
unsolicited, unbiased, biased opinion.
Yeah, and it's just
miseducated, misinformed,
kind of
just everything wrong with social media right now.
Yeah,
okay,
kind
anyway.
of, and it's just sort of like formed on hype and like spread of misinformation kind of thing. It was really interesting, and I was quite grateful at the end that I got to maybe get like quite a controversial nutrient as well. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's something that pretty much you actually could say you've done the research on it. I mean, I've seen thousands and thousands of people who write, I've done the research, and it's like you read like 6 blogs. And your friend's Facebook status. Not research. So you actually got to go into it and have like a bit of a deeper dive on what fluoride is and what it's doing, and then also the intakes.
Yes,
So is that mostly behavior driven, or so like how much people are taking in?
It's probably like primarily, so your sort of main sources of fluoride are your dental products, like your toothpaste, your mouthwashes, water. But like I said, not depending on where you live in New Zealand, your water might or might not be fluoridated. And food. Right. But very low amounts in food. We wouldn't even look there, you know, sort of thing. So that was like the 3 main areas that we looked at. And so it was kind of more like your toothbrushing and if you like swallow toothpaste or not, which I didn't really, I sort of thought it might be common knowledge. You brush your teeth and you spit it out, but some people do swallow toothpaste, which of course leads to it's quite a high fluoride intake, because fluoride and toothpaste and mouthwash and everything, they are quite high in fluoride. So because they're designed to sort of you like bathe your mouth in it and then you spit it out. But some people who were like, they were quite, you know, the intakes are quite high. But yeah, so it's mainly just like where you live and your dental hygiene.
Right. Okay. That's really, really interesting, and I hope that does that become available to the public at any point, or is it one of those things that you can publish if you want, but you don't necessarily have to? Yeah,
I think it's on that angle. I'm not entirely sure, but I know we have our symposium, because it was part of a big study called the Sundial study, and we have that in November, and I assume after that. This sounds really bad, but once I finished thesis, I was like, all right, move on to the next thing. Like I really haven't looked back at it, but I know it'll come back into play later on in the year, and I'll have to do something with it. So
that's awesome. So you actually did proper research. I'm looking forward. Hopefully we can see that at some point, because I'm quite interested. I mean, I just love reading research. Obviously, I'm a researcher myself, and a lot of the stuff that I do is just I like seeing where like a lot of the resources are put towards different things. So it's like, what are people researching? Where would this sort of idea come from? Like, why is it that they understand the world that they know? And then you're like, it's because there's nothing there. So people are just making up their own opinions.
Literally. And it's research. It was such an interesting experience in terms of like, cause I was never really a big fan of research. I never thought that was an area that I was going to go into. But like, just, I think acknowledging that so much of like, you know, the recommendations that we have in our healthcare and our standards of care and so many of the things that we do day to day, you know, our bread is fortified with whatever because of research. Like research is so important and it's such a big part of day-to-day living. And I think that was a really big realization that, you know, like all the p-values and the confidence intervals and everything like that we got was because someone answered my questionnaire. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Like, and somebody gave me what they'd eaten a day. Like,
you're gathering heaps and heaps of data points just to get as close to the mean as possible. So like, is the mean as close? So do you have that wide or do you have a narrow confidence interval? And that's getting nerdy on stats. But like everything that we do is informed by years and years and years of trial and error, and then people are measuring that trial and error and then putting forward recommendations for other things. And that's why it's frustrating as people who are like actually at the frontier of research, so between the communities and where you sit, and then you have people who like have no idea how any of this works, and they're like, they just need to do more exercise, or they shouldn't fluoridate the water. It's like, okay, based on your one opinion in that one household on your one street.
And it's like all the effort and all the time that's gone into like establishing the, you know, the research that we have now, and they think that you just sort of pull it out of fully. And like, I get it, it's wise to be skeptical in all areas of life, understandably, but you also need to, I think people don't really understand the, you know, like the amount that goes into research, or the history of it and how far it's come and all the changes and everything that people have had to do to get to the conclusions that we're at now. And they're probably going to change, especially in a topic like nutrition, which is quite sort of young, but this is where we're at now, and this is you kind of got to accept.
Well, you're setting the foundation.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
All right. So, oh gosh, that flew. So our final question that we ask everyone is just, what is something that you do daily or close to daily that kind of sets you up? So it could be a routine, it could be one little thing that you do, but close to daily that you feel like optimizes your day and then therefore the rest of your week, month, year in life.
Oh, God, great question. Probably 2 things: listening to music and exercising.
Cool.
Definitely. Love exercising. Always gives me energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any music in particular, or do you just need to get that music in? Are you walking while you're listening to this music? Do you just wake up, put it straight on?
Sometimes I just chuck on my headphones and make my bed, or chuck my when I'm on the bus or driving to work or listening to the radio. Yeah, always makes me feel good. And there's no particular music. I love the whole when you meet new people and the music you've got on your playlist is sort of reflective of a certain time in your life or a certain person you've met, who's introduced you to I love that. Yeah,
I mean, one song can bring back so many memories of different things, places you've been, people you've been with. I didn't even think about playlists as a curated narration of your life.
It is. That's literally what it is. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, I remember I was listening to a song came out the other day that was when Tino Miriana and I did the studentship up in Auckland, and I was like, that was that. It really brought back.
All these memories. Yeah, nice. And in your exercise, are you very strict on how you exercise, or is it just get moving?
It's very much when I can, but I know it's always a matter of if I've had a big day and I just want to lie down, I know that if I exercise that I will feel better, and I'm training for a half marathon at the moment.
Nice.
So that's where we're at.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we can get after that as well.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, that has been another episode of the Sick As podcast. Molly, thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate that discussion.
Yes, yeah, definitely.